Lately, the relationship between the United States and Canada has been pretty rocky, all thanks to new trade restrictions and countermeasures. What started as a national-level dispute has now trickled down, with individual provinces in Canada stepping up to take action on their own. Take British Columbia, for example. The province has been making bold moves to push back against U.S. policies. But before diving into the details of what's happening there, let's rewind a bit to see how this all started. February 1st, President Donald Trump issued executive orders slapping a 25% tariff on everything coming into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. Canadian energy products got a slightly better deal with a 10% tariff. The U.S. government defended this decision by linking it to concerns over illegal immigration and drug smuggling, especially fentanyl, coming in through the northern border. February 2nd, Canada didn't waste any time fighting back. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau unveiled a plan to hit back with a 25% tariff on a long list of American products. Things like orange juice, beer, coffee, cosmetics, motorcycles, and clothing. Altogether, these tariffs added up to a staggering $30 billion. February 3rd. Both countries hit pause for a month to give negotiations a shot. Canada promised to appoint a dedicated fentanyl task force and ramp up border security, while Mexico agreed to station more troops along its northern border. February 10th. Trump dropped another bombshell, a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports covering every country, including Canada and Mexico. The reasoning? National security concerns. March 3rd. Trump put an end to any lingering hopes of a peaceful resolution. He confirmed that all previously delayed tariffs were back on track and would take effect the next day. This news sent U.S. stock markets into a nosedive. The S&P 500 fell 1.8%, and the NASDAQ 100 took a 2.6% hit. March 4th, the U.S. officially rolled out its 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, and Canada retaliated at the exact same time with its own $30 billion worth of tariffs on American goods. March 6th, the U.S. softened its stance a little, offering a 30-day delay on tariffs for products that met the terms of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. This covered about 38% of Canadian imports. Canada responded by holding off on expanding its tariffs but kept the current ones in place. March 12th, the U.S. doubled down, slapping another 25% tariff, specifically on steel and aluminum coming from Canada. March 13th. Canada fired back again. A fresh round of 25% tariffs kicked in, this time affecting $20.6 billion worth of U.S. products, including steel, aluminum, and a range of other goods. The trade battle was now in full swing. Provincial payback. Canada's provinces weren't about to sit on the sidelines. Ontario decided to stop buying alcohol from American companies. Quebec followed suit, pulling U.S. products from liquor stores and reviewing government contracts tied to American businesses. Manitoba and Newfoundland and Labrador took an even tougher stance, outright banning the sale of American alcohol. Nova Scotia found another way to make an impact, doubling toll fees for American vehicles entering the province. Yukon also got involved, banning U.S. alcohol and reviewing its contracts to see where else it could push back. But British Columbia took things to another level. The province specifically targeted alcohol imports from Republican-led states as part of its strategy. Then, in early March 2025, Premier David Eby proposed a new law that would allow BC to impose tolls and fees on U.S. commercial vehicles using its roads to reach Alaska. This was just one piece of a much larger plan aimed at striking back against U.S. trade policies. British Columbia is considering a bold move to counter U.S. trade pressures, and it could have serious ripple effects. A newly proposed law called the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act would give the province the power to charge tolls on U.S. commercial trucks passing through British Columbia on their way to Alaska. However, this wouldn't happen automatically. The law would simply allow the government to act if necessary. Interestingly, the legislation also mentions ferry routes along the coast, which suggests British Columbia is keeping its options open. That could mean future fees on marine traffic, including ferries or even cruise ships heading toward Alaska. While this might seem like a minor detail, It raises the possibility of a much broader economic impact beyond just trucking. Premier David Eby was careful to clarify that these tolls wouldn't affect everyday travelers. Tourists, personal vehicles, and road-tripping families wouldn't be targeted. Instead, the focus would be on large cargo trucks carrying goods through British Columbia. According to Eby, this proposal is meant as a direct response to American tariffs. If the U.S. keeps pushing trade barriers, BC wants the ability to push back by applying fees to commercial trucks using its highways. Although the plan wasn't immediately put into action, it was clear that British Columbia saw it as a strategic tool, something to hold on to in case tensions with the U.S. escalated further. In essence, it was a bargaining chip, not an immediate policy change. Even before anything was officially implemented, the very idea of these tolls caused alarm in Alaska, where businesses and residents rely heavily on supply routes that pass through British Columbia. Most goods that come from the lower 48 states into Alaska arrive by truck, moving along Canadian highways before crossing back into the U.S. If British Columbia imposed tolls on those routes, it would immediately raise the cost of shipping, with those expenses likely passed down to businesses and consumers. This could quickly become a serious issue. Higher transportation costs would make everything from groceries to building materials more expensive in Alaska. Trucking companies, already dealing with long distances and tough weather conditions, might have to raise their rates or even reduce service. Some companies could look for alternative shipping methods, such as sea freight, but that presents its own challenges. Ships are slower, have limited capacity, and aren't always a viable option for time-sensitive goods like fresh produce or medical supplies. The Alaska Trucking Association was quick to warn that these tolls could cause real problems. If the cost became too high, freight companies might reroute or scale back operations, which would leave small businesses struggling to get the supplies they need. Alaska's supply chain is already delicate, balancing long distances, unpredictable weather, and logistical challenges. Adding a new toll or administrative hurdle at the British Columbia border could throw things off balance even further. Beyond shipping and trade, there was also concern about how these potential fees could impact tourism. If British Columbia decided to expand the toll system to include ferries or cruise ships, the effects could go well beyond cargo transport. Nearly every cruise heading to Alaska makes at least one stop in a British Columbia port. If the province introduced new port fees or regulations, cruise lines might pass the cost on to passengers, or worse, change their routes to avoid Canadian stops altogether. This could have significant consequences for both Canadian and Alaskan tourism. Fewer cruise stops in British Columbia would hurt businesses in Victoria and Vancouver, which rely on tourist spending. At the same time, any disruptions to cruise operations could make Alaska a less convenient or appealing destination. Considering that almost 2 million cruise passengers visit Alaska in a typical season, even a slight drop in traffic could lead to economic losses on both sides of the border. There was also the possibility that toll infrastructure, even if aimed at commercial trucks, could create delays that indirectly affected tourists. If major highways had new toll booths or checkpoints, road travelers, especially those driving RVs, might face unexpected slowdowns. British Columbia officials acknowledged that setting up toll collection would be complicated. It would require building entirely new infrastructure, hiring staff, and managing payments, all of which could make implementation more challenging than it initially seemed. Legal questions also arose. Parts of the Alaska Highway are covered by international agreements that historically barred tolls, which could complicate British Columbia's ability to carry out its plan. If fees were extended to ferries along the coast, there was also speculation that Alaska's state-run ferry system, which sometimes uses British Columbia's ports and waters, could be affected as well. As soon as British Columbia's toll proposal became public, Alaskan officials reacted swiftly. Politicians, business leaders, and trade organizations across the state voiced strong concerns, arguing that these fees would place an unfair burden on Alaska's economy. Many warned that higher transportation costs could hurt small businesses, increase the cost of living, and disrupt the supply of essential goods. Governor Mike Dunleavy urged a cautious approach, emphasizing the need for a federal-level solution, rather than allowing individual provinces or states to take unilateral action. He stressed that trade disputes between the U.S. and Canada should be resolved diplomatically to avoid unintended economic consequences. His message was clear. He wanted cooler heads to prevail before any major decisions were made. In a public statement, Dunleavy expressed hope that Canada's national government and the U.S. administration would work together to find a resolution before British Columbia followed through with its plan. He warned that if provinces and states acted independently, it could make negotiations even more difficult. While Alaska's government held out hope for a diplomatic solution, British Columbia appeared determined to keep its options open, signaling that it was ready to act if U.S. trade policies continued to threaten its economy. Governor Mike Dunleavy took a measured approach, urging British Columbia to think twice before moving forward. His response showed he understood Canada's frustrations but warned that slapping tolls on Alaska-bound trucks would set a dangerous precedent. Rather than escalate tensions, he pushed for a cooler, more diplomatic solution. Senator Dan Sullivan, on the other hand, came out swinging. He made it clear that if British Columbia tried to impose tolls on trucks heading to Alaska, he wouldn't just sit back and watch. Instead, he promised to fight back with his own countermeasures. In a radio interview, Sullivan brought up a law that requires cruise ships sailing from the U.S. to make a stop in Canada before heading to Alaska. He said that if BC went ahead with its toll plan, he would push to get rid of that rule permanently. That would mean cruise ships could skip Canadian ports entirely, taking away a major source of tourism revenue from places like Vancouver and Victoria. His threat wasn't just talk. Back in 2021, the U.S. had already temporarily waived the rule when Canada shut down its ports during the pandemic. That allowed cruise ships to sail straight from Washington state to Alaska, completely bypassing Canada. Sullivan made it clear that if BC played hardball, he'd work to make that change permanent. Are you still watching? If yes, it means you appreciate. Why don't you like the video and subscribe? Yes, subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay informed and updated on our content. Alaska's trucking industry wasted no time voicing its concerns over the possibility of new tolls. Jamie Benson, head of the Alaska Trucking Association, put out a statement warning of the serious consequences such fees could bring. According to Benson, charging tolls on British Columbia's highways would drive up shipping costs, disrupt supply chains, and make essential goods more expensive for Alaskans. He urged British Columbia's leaders to consider the long-standing, positive trade relationships between the two regions, and to hold off on any drastic measures while national governments work out their trade disagreements. His appeal made one thing clear: businesses see this as a dangerous step in the wrong direction. Other Alaskan trade groups, including local commerce chambers and industry representatives, echoed similar worries. They pointed out that for decades, businesses on both sides of the border have worked together smoothly, from freight companies crossing back and forth with ease to coordinated tourism efforts. A trade war between Alaska and British Columbia, they argued, would be bad for everyone. Alaska's lawmakers also jumped into the conversation, particularly those with experience in transportation. State Senator Robert Myers, who also happens to be a truck driver, painted a grim picture of what these tolls could mean. He explained that Alaska depends heavily on trucked-in fresh produce, and these new fees could put those deliveries at risk. He also pointed out that the oil industry's logistics could be affected, making fuel supply chains more expensive and unpredictable. Given his background in both politics and trucking, his warnings carried significant weight. Other legislators in Juneau emphasized the importance of keeping strong ties with Canada. Many pushed for Alaska's state government to sit down with British Columbia's officials and find a solution before things escalated further. There were also calls for the U.S. Trade Representative to factor Alaska's unique situation into any larger federal negotiations on tariffs. Although most of the concerns centered on freight, Alaska's tourism industry was also keeping a close eye on the situation. So far, major cruise companies, many of which are based outside of Alaska, haven't made any public statements on Senator Sullivan's proposal to bypass Canadian ports. However, local tour operators and travel advocates in Alaska don't want to see tensions with British Columbia spiral out of control. Some tour companies are worried that if cruise lines actually stop docking in Canada, It could complicate travel logistics or make trips less convenient for visitors. While skipping Canadian ports might sound like a simpler, more direct route to Alaska, the reality isn't so straightforward. Beyond the cruise industry, Alaska's ferry system is another piece of the puzzle. It has already been struggling with cutbacks and reduced service, so its supporters are hoping that the cross-border ferry link to Prince Rupert won't become a casualty of a larger trade fight. For many Alaskans who regularly drive or take ferries between the two countries, this is about more than just politics. It's about keeping life in the north connected and accessible. They worry that new tolls or restrictions could make ordinary travel between Alaska and Canada more complicated, expensive, or restricted. All of this brings us to the key issue at hand: how people and goods actually move between Alaska and the rest of the U.S. The Alaska Highway, often called the Alcan, is the main road link between Alaska and the lower 48 states. Built during World War II, this historic route stretches roughly 2,450 kilometers from Dawson Creek, British Columbia, through the Yukon, and into interior Alaska. About 80% of the highway runs through Canada, making it a critical lifeline for both Alaskans and businesses in northern Canada. It supports freight transport, connects remote communities, and serves as the primary overland route for anyone driving between Alaska and the continental U.S. In addition to the Alaska Highway, there are other important routes that provide alternate pathways or connect different regions. One of them is the Cassiar Highway, BC Highway 37, which cuts through northern British Columbia and links up with the Alaska Highway in the Yukon. This serves as a secondary route for drivers heading toward Alaska. Another key road is the Haines Highway, which runs through a small part of British Columbia, connecting Haines, Alaska, to the Yukon near Haines Junction. These highways aren't just for freight, they're also vital for tourism. Thousands of travelers, especially those in RVs or caravans, drive these routes every year. The Alaska Highway alone accounted for nearly half, 45%, of the Yukon's 366,500 summer visitors in 2014, showing just how important it is for tourism in both Canada and Alaska. The roads connecting Alaska to the rest of the world aren't just highways, they're lifelines. These routes keep communities stocked with essential goods like groceries, building materials, and everyday supplies. Without them, many Alaskans would struggle to get what they need. Beyond the main highways, smaller roads also play a role in keeping Alaska connected. For example, the route between Stewart, British Columbia, and Hyder, Alaska links the southeastern part of the state to Canada's road network. These connections may not be as well known as the Alaska Highway, but they serve a crucial function for people living in more remote areas. Highways like these don't just support trade, they're a key part of Alaska's tourism industry as well. Thousands of travelers, many driving RVs or taking road trips, make their way between the lower 48 and Alaska each year. The Alaska Highway alone plays a huge role in this, bringing in nearly half of Yukon's 366,500 summer visitors in 2014. It's proof that these routes aren't just about business, they're also about adventure, exploration, and keeping the northern economy moving. But Alaska isn't just linked to the rest of the U.S. by land. The Alaska Marine Highway System, AMHS, is another major connection, using ferries to transport people, vehicles, and cargo along the coast. These ferries link communities in southeast Alaska with Washington State and British Columbia, providing an alternative to the long highway drive or expensive flights. Stretching over 3,500 miles of coastline, the ferry system is an essential part of Alaska's transportation network. Its southernmost port is in Bellingham, Washington, though in the past there was also a key terminal in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, the northernmost road-accessible port on Canada's west coast. Many ferries heading to Alaska follow the Inside Passage, a coastal waterway along British Columbia's shoreline. For travelers, it's a scenic and convenient way to reach Alaska. In 2014 alone, over 103,000 visitors used the ferry system, many of them boarding in Bellingham or Prince Rupert and bringing vehicles or RVs along for the journey. This ferry network isn't just about tourism, it's a necessity. It provides an alternative way for residents to travel, allows for vehicle transport, and ensures freight can keep moving when road routes aren't an option. All of this highlights a larger reality. Alaska depends on Canadian infrastructure to function smoothly. With no highway or railway system that connects Alaska to the lower 48 without passing through Canada, the state relies heavily on its northern neighbor for transportation, trade, and tourism. Most of the goods coming into Alaska, particularly bulk commodities and consumer products, arrive by sea from Washington state. According to Alaska's Department of Transportation, more than 90% of cargo heading for Alaska is shipped by ocean. However, the remaining 10% travels by road, and that portion includes some of the most urgent and time-sensitive deliveries. Fresh produce is a perfect example. Much of Alaska's fruits and vegetables are trucked up the Alaska Highway through Canada to ensure they arrive quickly and in good condition. An Alaskan state legislator who also happens to be a truck driver explained that the vast majority of fresh food shipments make their way into Alaska by truck rather than by sea because perishable goods need speed. The oil and gas industry also relies on fast transportation. When equipment or replacement parts are needed urgently, they go on a truck, not a barge. Shipping by sea is great for large, heavy cargo, but it's not always the best option for something that needs to arrive quickly. Even though marine transport plays a massive role in Alaska's economy, these examples show that land routes through Canada remain critical. Tourism is another sector that relies on seamless access through Canada. Every summer, thousands of travelers drive up from the lower 48, passing through British Columbia and the Yukon before reaching Alaska. Along the way, they spend money at Canadian gas stations, hotels, and restaurants, contributing to the economies of both countries. For many of these travelers, the journey is just as important as the destination. The highways that stretch through Canada aren't just roads. They're part of the Alaskan experience, bringing in visitors and helping businesses thrive on both sides of the border. Cruise ships and ferries play a huge role in Alaska's tourism, and their connection to Canada is more than just a coincidence. It's built into U.S. law. Because of the Passenger Vessel Services Act, large foreign-flagged cruise ships traveling from the lower 48 to Alaska are required to stop at a Canadian port along the way. This means that nearly every major Alaska-bound cruise includes stops in Vancouver, Victoria, or Prince Rupert, giving both sides a reason to keep this relationship running smoothly. Alaska gets the influx of visitors, while Canadian ports benefit from the spending of cruise passengers passing through. Before the pandemic in 2019, roughly 1.3 million cruise passengers made their way to Alaska, nearly all traveling through Canadian ports. By 2023, that number was expected to hit 1.9 million, a massive boost for both tourism industries. Beyond cruises, Alaska's ferry system has also relied on Prince Rupert, British Columbia, for years. This route wasn't just convenient for Canadians looking to visit Alaska, it also provided Alaskans with easy access to Canada's road and rail networks. This kind of connectivity has made travel, trade, and tourism between the two regions seamless for decades. Because of these deeply linked systems, Alaska's economy, tourism industry, and transportation networks are heavily tied to Canada's infrastructure. From the highways that carry trucks full of food and supplies to the ports and railways just across the border. But if tolls or new trade barriers are introduced, those connections could face serious strain. Higher transportation costs would make everyday goods more expensive in Alaska, supply chains could be disrupted, and the tourism industry might take a hit, all of which have Alaskan businesses and officials deeply concerned. The reaction from Alaska's leadership has been swift and strong. While Governor Dunleavy has taken a diplomatic approach, pushing for negotiations, Senator Sullivan has made it clear that Alaska is ready to retaliate if necessary. At the same time, British Columbia's leaders are trying to balance local frustration over U.S. trade policies with the need to maintain positive regional relationships. The situation highlights an important reality. Even in times of friendly U.S. Canada relations, economic disputes can create unexpected challenges at the state and provincial level. This is why stable international agreements matter. If trade tensions continue, both Alaskans and British Columbians could face lasting consequences, something neither side can afford. While the back and forth between political leaders plays out, what's truly at stake isn't just tariffs or tolls, but the long-standing partnership that has kept these regions connected and thriving for generations. Thank you for watching. If you appreciated this video, do not forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so as to receive more of such content.